57% of parents report feeling burned out, not just tired, burned out. And many of them have thought the same thing, but wouldn't dare say it aloud. Not that they want to die, just that they want to disappear. Disappear from the demands. Disappear from being touched, needed, pulled at from every direction, just long enough to breathe again, but instead they smile, they fold the laundry, they show up. And somewhere between breakfast and bedtime they begin to vanish. You wake before the sun, not because it's peaceful, but because it's the only way to stay ahead of the avalanche. The lunch boxes, the socks, the reminders, the needs, and before your own nervous system even wakes up, you're already bracing for impact. You don't ask yourself how you feel. There's no time. You check boxes, not your breath. You smile, not because it feels good, but because it keeps things moving. This is the performance, and you've mastered it, but somewhere behind the daily grind, there's a sound you've stopped noticing. It's the sound of your own name, spoken not by others, but by you. It's the sound of a part of you that's still alive, still aching, still hoping to be seen. It's the self. Jung described the self as the totality of who you are, beyond roles, beyond routines. The self is the you that existed before you were needed, before you became everything for everyone. The self doesn't demand. It doesn't shout. It waits. It waits in the music you stopped listening to, in the books you haven't opened, in the breath you hold before opening the bedroom door, and when it goes too long unspoken, it begins to ache. That ache you feel, it's not failure, it's not selfishness. It's the signal that something sacred is being forgotten. But the world won't remind you because the world praises the vanishing act. You're such a good mom. He's always on top of things. They give everything. They mean it as a compliment. But what they don't see is that everything has started to mean your identity, your rest, your joy, gone. This is the quiet erosion, the slow subtraction of self in the name of love. But here's the paradox. Your child doesn't need your disappearance. They need your presence. Not the kind you perform, the kind you inhabit. They need to see you whole, even if that wholeness is messy. Even if it includes saying no, even if it means they have to wait a moment while you take a breath. Because what they see in you is what they'll believe about love. If they see you burn out for them, they'll believe love requires self-erasure. But if they see you light a candle in the dark and sit with your own soul, they'll learn something else entirely, that love begins in the center, that presence matters more than perfection, that you can care for others without disappearing from yourself. So light the candle, pause in the hallway, let the coffee go cold if it means you're listening again to your inner name. Your child will not remember how perfect you were. They'll remember whether you were here, whether you lived, whether you let them see you stay, not just in the room, in yourself. You tell yourself it's just exhaustion, that this is what love looks like, that if you just get through this week or this year or this phase, it'll be easier. But the truth is, this isn't about a bad week. It's about the quiet crisis that's been building underneath everything you carry. Parental burnout doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, "I can't keep doing this." Sometimes it sobs in silence behind a locked bathroom door. Sometimes it sits in the car outside your own house, just hoping for a few more minutes before stepping back inside. One mother wrote, "I used to pull into the driveway and just sit there with the engine off, staring at nothing. Not because I hated my life, but because I couldn't find myself in it anymore." Another said, "I snapped at my toddler for spilling milk, and I cried harder than he did." These aren't rare confessions, they're just rarely spoken. The world sees your surface, how much you do, how well you hold it together, but it doesn't see the invisible weight, the kind you carry in your chest, in your jaw, in the way you flinch when one more person asks for something. This is the drowning season, not because you can't swim, but because the tide never stops rising. You keep telling yourself to just tread water a little longer. But there's no shore in sight. You've spent so long keeping everyone else afloat that you didn't notice your own body slipping beneath the surface. And here's the cruel twist. The better you are at appearing functional, the less anyone thinks to ask how you're doing. Burnout is not about laziness. It's not about not loving your children enough. It's about the erosion of self under the relentless weight of unmet needs. Yours, unspoken needs, unacknowledged desires, the part of you that once lit up when no one was watching. Jung warned of this trap. He called it identification with the persona, the mask we wear to survive in the world, the role we perform so often that we start to believe it's all we are. The good mother, the strong father, the unshakable parent who always knows what to do, but the longer you wear the mask, the more the self recedes. And eventually the mask doesn't protect you, it suffocates you, and you start to forget, what do I actually want? When was the last time I felt joy not tied to someone else's smile? Who was I before this? That's when the burnout begins to spiral. Because when there's nothing left for you, you start giving from deficit. You start reacting instead of responding. You start counting down the hours until bedtime, not because you don't love them, but because you don't know how to love from emptiness. It's a paradox no one talks about, that you can love your child fiercely and still feel like you're disappearing. And the deeper tragedy, the longer you disappear, the more your child learns that this is what love looks like: self-neglect, silence, smiling while breaking. But love doesn't have to look like this. You don't have to drown in your devotion, because the most powerful thing your child can witness is not your exhaustion, it's your return, your boundaries, your breath, your willingness to say, I matter too, not later, now, while they're still watching, while they're still learning what love really means. Because if you're barely staying above water, they won't just inherit your genetics, they'll inherit your grief, your self-erasure, your silence. And that's not the legacy you came here to leave. So let this moment be what it is. Not failure, not weakness, but a signal. You are underwater, and it's time to rise, not by doing more, but by remembering that you were never meant to disappear to prove your love. There comes a moment, quiet and sudden, when something inside you gives out. You're not sure what. There's no dramatic scene, just a crack in the routine that doesn't close. You drop a spoon, you forget what you were doing, you snap at your child over something small and meaningless, and then you sit down in the middle of the hallway and cry harder than they do. It doesn't feel like burnout, it feels like disappearing in real time. This is the moment most people never talk about. The moment when parenting becomes survival. And even survival feels uncertain. A father once wrote, I walked into the kitchen and forgot why I was there. I stood for 10 minutes, unable to move. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't know how to keep pretending I was okay. That's not weakness, that's the shadow. Jung taught that the shadow isn't just the dark side. It's every part of you that's been exiled in the name of being good. The anger you swallow, the grief you bury, the desire you ignore, the exhaustion you deny, and the longer you deny it, the louder it gets. Until one day it breaks through. Your shadow isn't here to shame you, it's here to save you, to return you to wholeness. You can't integrate what you refuse to see. And you can't heal what you keep calling just another phase. There's a reason mythology tells of gods and mothers collapsing. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, loses her daughter to the underworld, and in her grief the world goes barren. No crops, no warmth, no life. Even the divine breaks when what it loves is taken. You are allowed to break too. You are allowed to stop. But what's dangerous isn't the breaking. It's the silence that follows, the shame that tells you to keep going, the guilt that tells you rest is indulgence, the fear that if you stop, everything will fall apart. But here's what no one tells you. Everything already has. You can't rebuild a life that never included you. You can't keep handing out energy you never replenish. You can't keep pretending that holding everything together is the same as being whole. Burnout isn't a phase, it's a summons, not to do more, but to turn inward, to face the self that's been knocking on the door, not the parent, not the partner, the you that remembers the sound of your own laughter, the you that used to dream of more than sleep, the you who was never meant to be buried beneath obligation. Even now, underneath the weight, the guilt, the silence, that self still lives. Jung called it the guide and the goal, the flame at the center of the cave, and the cave is where you are now, dark, still, alone. But this is not your end, this is your descent, and descent in every myth worth remembering is the beginning of return. There is a room inside you no one else can enter. You may have forgotten it, or maybe you never knew it was yours. But it has always been there, quiet, sacred, patient. And in the center of that room, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the noise, beneath the roles you perform so well, there is a single candle still burning. That flame is the self, not your ego, not your to-do list, not the story you've been telling the world to prove you're okay, but your center, your wholeness, the part of you that existed before motherhood, before fatherhood, before responsibility became identity. Jung wrote that the self is not just who you are, it's what you are becoming. And every time you ignore its voice, you drift further from the life that belongs to you. But the candle waits. It does not rage, it does not shame. It flickers with quiet persistence, waiting for you to come home. Maybe you've seen it in flashes, in a dream that haunted you but made no sense, in a song that brought you to tears in the middle of the grocery store, in the way your hands long to create something, anything, just for yourself. These moments aren't weakness, they're signals. The self doesn't scream. It speaks in symbols, and when you begin to listen, something shifts. You start to reclaim time, not big, dramatic hours, just 10 minutes to breathe before everyone wakes. A walk that's not for steps or errands, but for silence. You begin to journal, not for insight, but for survival. You write things down that don't make sense, but feel like they matter. You draw shapes, circles, patterns. You let your unconscious speak in lines and color. You open a dream journal, not to analyze, but to acknowledge. To say, I see you, to the part of you the world forgot. This isn't self-care as the culture markets it. This is soul retrieval. This is remembering that you're not a ghost. Clarissa Pinkola Estes tells the story of La Loba, the bone gatherer. She wanders the desert collecting forgotten fragments of creatures long dead, and when she has enough, she sits by the fire and sings over them. And one by one the bones come alive. This is you now, gathering the pieces of yourself, not to go back, but to rise again. You're not the person you were before, you never will be, but you are still yours. And the moment you stop hiding from that truth, the flame grows brighter. Your children don't need your perfection, they need your presence, your wholeness. The example of someone who can hold the complexity of love and longing in the same breath. And what you reclaim now will echo in them for years to come, because one day they will lose themselves too. And if all they've seen is a parent erasing themselves in the name of love, they will believe that's their destiny too. But if they've seen you return, if they've watched you step into the quiet room inside yourself and light that candle again, they will remember. They will remember that love can be generous and still have boundaries, that caregiving doesn't mean self-eviction, that you don't have to vanish to belong, and maybe, just maybe, they will learn to stay with themselves a little longer because they saw you do it first. There is a moment, quiet and unceremonious, when you no longer want to vanish, not because life has gotten easier, but because something within you has decided enough. Enough of surviving, enough of smiling while breaking, enough of giving everything while keeping nothing. And from that decision, a new rhythm begins. Not loud, not heroic, subtle, small, real. You turn off your phone while drinking your coffee. You listen to music in the car, not just to drown out the silence, but because it stirs something in you. You start to say no without guilt. You ask for help, not to be rescued, but to stay whole. This is not indulgence. It is repair, reclamation, sacred defiance against the myth that love means self-extinction. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And in parenting, that privilege is often buried under obligation, but it's still yours, still waiting. And when you begin to reclaim it, your children feel the shift. Not because you lecture them, but because you soften, you pause, you laugh again. Really laugh, not the clipped version you give while multitasking. They see it in how you move, how you breathe, how you let go of being perfect and choose instead to be present. They don't need you to hold the world. They need to see how you hold yourself, how you recognize when you're empty and give yourself the same compassion you give them on their hardest days. This isn't abandoning them, it's showing them what self-trust looks like, what emotional honesty feels like, what it means to stay rooted when everything is spinning. And paradoxically, this is where parenting deepens. Not when you become everything, but when you remember you are someone. This is the return of yourself, not the version the world approved, not the persona you perfected, but the true self, imperfect, growing, real. You're not seeking escape anymore, you're creating sanctuary. A parent who is alive, awake, and aligned is a force, not because they never break, but because they rebuild with intention. You begin to see that rest isn't a pause from life, it is life, that joy doesn't have to be earned, that your inner world deserves as much care as your home, and slowly your children learn from you that tending to your soul is not selfish, it is sacred responsibility, because what they inherit isn't just your genetics or your lessons, they inherit your energy, your emotional patterns, your example. You reclaim yourself not just for you, but to change the blueprint, to become the ancestor who healed the exhaustion legacy, the one who stopped passing down the silence, the one who said, "I will not teach my child that love means losing your voice." You are not becoming someone new, you are remembering someone true. And that remembering, one breath, one boundary, one brave pause at a time, is what begins to rewrite everything. You wake before the sun. The house is quiet, but this time your breath doesn't brace. It lands. You light the candle, not for atmosphere, not for anyone else, but because it reminds you that something in you is still burning, still sacred. And for the first time in a long time, you look in the mirror and don't flinch. You see someone who stayed, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. This is not a transformation anyone else will celebrate. There is no applause for becoming whole again, no badge for reclaiming yourself. But inside you, something settles, not in defeat, but in deep peace. Jung wrote that the self is both the center and the circumference, the guide and the destination. And through every collapse, every silence, every cracked moment, it was there, waiting for you to return. And now you have. Not to the life you had before, but to the life that includes you again. Your parenting hasn't gotten easier, the world hasn't gotten quieter, but you've changed your shape within it. You've taken back your name, because now you know being present doesn't mean being consumed. Giving love doesn't require your disappearance. Carrying others does not mean dropping yourself. You are not a martyr. You are not a machine. You are a soul carrying generations. And in healing your own burnout, you begin to mend the silence passed down by those who didn't have this language, who didn't know how to stay with themselves while staying with the ones they loved. You are now that example. Your child may not thank you today. They may not notice the quiet courage it takes to pause, to breathe, to ask for what you need. But one day when they are tired, when they feel pulled too far from their center, they will remember. They will remember that love did not erase you, that you were visible, vulnerable, whole, and that presence, your presence, became their compass. And when they light their own candle in the dark, they will know they are not alone, because you went first. Hafiz once wrote, "I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being." Let that line be your mirror now, because Jung also said, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their children than the unlived life of the parent. So live, breathe, rest, create, And when the world rushes you, when the role begins to tighten, when the script tells you to disappear again, return to that candle, that room, that self. You are here, you are whole, you are becoming. And you were never, never meant to disappear. If this journey made you feel seen, if something inside you stirred, don't keep it quiet. Say something in the comments. Let someone else feel a little less alone. And if you've begun to reclaim yourself, click like, not for the algorithm, but for the part of you that finally knows you still belong here.